One said our consultant gave us a list of agencies for us. Without much research, we picked some and applied. And then she said some agencies were much easier to work with and had much smaller upfront fees. Some not as friendly, and the fees were more expensive. I would ask each agency specifically what their average case fees were, as we saw some very large variances at some agencies that we didn't even like. Actually, that's a good point also. Your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in La La Land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. Well, good morning and welcome to this week's episode of This Week in Adoption. I am Rebecca Gruenspan, the founder and CEO of RG Adoption Consulting, and every week I come on live and I tell you what's been happening in our community and in the world of adoption. So I'm going to start first with a question that came up in our community. Somebody asked, have you adopted in a case where the birth father is unknown or not around to consent? The worries over this idea for a certain time after we bring home the baby that the father could come out of the woodwork and consent. Are there stats on this? Well, I don't know the stats, but I'm going to read you some of the answers, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I know. And I am not an attorney. Most states have a paternal registry. Many states have them. Most, I think. This means that if a man believes he got a woman pregnant, he needs to know about this registry, put his name on this registry, which I believe costs money. And it is stating that I believe I may have a child out in the world. And if so, I want to be notified because I want my rights. Okay. So that's one step that they have to take. Even if they are on the registry. And by the way, if they're not on the registry, let me just go back. They have 30 days to come forward after birth mom signs, assuming they haven't signed and they haven't been involved. But even if they come forward, it doesn't mean that they automatically have rights to the baby. Again, I am not an attorney. They have to prove that they have been supportive of mom through the pregnancy and have been, part of her, I don't want to say part of her life, but basically have been supportive of this pregnancy. So there are things that have to happen. It does not happen often at all. Have I seen it happen in the last 10 years? Maybe once. I have seen birth fathers come forward wanting more to just make the birth mom's life a little bit more complicated and just fight for the sake of fighting, but not really having intention to parent. Maybe they think they'll get something out of it. I don't know. And I'm guessing that there are also cases where a birth father really should have been given the opportunity to parent and haven't. I don't know, and I want to believe that that hasn't happened with any of the cases that we have helped with, but I'm sure it does. So here are some of the answers that people gave. So we just adopted a little girl and the birth father is unknown, sort of. The presumed birth father was not in a mental state to be able to consent. Birth mom left his name off the birth certificate and we've had no issues. Every state is different, but in the state we adopted from, the birth father would have to show significant support in order to be able to consent the adoption after placement if he was not on the birth certificate. If she really doesn't know who he is and he's not on the birth certificate, you likely won't run into issues. True, but check with your attorney as every state manages this different. Right on. In most states, they do their due diligence of a paternity registry. I think the time is usually 30 days after birth that a man has to come forward before his rights are automatically terminated. Correct. Now, in states where there's not a paternity registry, there's different laws in those states, and I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure they're all a little bit different. I liked this answer. Yes, and the 30-day, I think that's what it was nerve-wracking for me. And my agency was not empathetic to the stress or helpful in confirming when we were, quote unquote, in the clear. It ended up being a non-issue, as others stated above. If he's not involved, he probably doesn't want to be, but it was stressful. It is a stressful time. And I feel like while there usually isn't anything to worry about during those 30 days, it is a relief and just that final exhale, or one of two final exhales. I think the final exhale is at finalization, but it's a big exhale once you know that 30 days has passed. One person said, our daughter was born in a different state and we had to unexpectedly live there for 6 weeks for the birth father's rights to be terminated. Usually that's not the case. I've really never heard of that, but I don't doubt that it happened. Before we were allowed to take her home. Make sure you understand the intricacies of the birth state and don't assume your agency has done their homework. That's good advice. I mean, you should always follow up and find out what it means, what needs to be done, has it been done, etc. So that was a great question that came up. Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. Another one that came up this week, a question was asked, not mentioning any specific agencies, how do you decide which agency to apply to? And this was a great answer. Now, when you're working with a consultant, usually the consultant is going to provide you a list of agencies to call. It doesn't mean that every agency is still taking families. It doesn't mean that every agency that is on your list is going to take you, depending on who you are and all your criteria. And it also doesn't mean that all of the information provided you, like we provide a lot of stats, is still going to be the case. And the reason I say this is not because we aren't doing our due diligence. One is we have a list of a ton of agencies, and it's really hard to keep on top of them every single month. So things change rapidly in the adoption world. So I may have talked to an agency one week and their financials may have changed the next, or their fall through rate may have gone up, or maybe they were taking families, but 3 weeks later, now they're not. Or maybe they were taking single moms, but now they're not. So a lot can happen, and you still have to call. But I thought these answers were worth sharing. One said, our consultant gave us a list of agencies for us without much research. We picked some and applied. And then she said some agencies were much easier to work with and had much smaller upfront fees, some not as friendly, and the fees were more expensive. I would ask each agency specifically what their average case fees were, as we saw some very large variances at some agencies that we didn't even like. Actually, that's a good point also. I actually just did a podcast interview yesterday, and the woman was saying how when she signed up with agencies, the financials were around 35 to 45, right? Or 40 to 50, whatever it was. And throughout the year that they were with this agency, it went up 10 to 20,000. That is a huge difference. So you always want to check, what are your average adoption fees for each situation? Do they fluctuate? Are they usually around the same? Let's see. When we went through the process, we had some pretty strict criteria. We only wanted an agency that would serve LGBTQ plus clients, even though we are not, people of any faith or non-faith, even though we could have qualified for various Christian agencies, and ones that offered care and counseling for biological moms before and after placement. And then he said, we would rather support agencies that fit these criteria. I did research off of the list we were sent. Some of them didn't fit what we were looking for or weren't accepting of our family. This family had multiple children. She made a spreadsheet with all the data that she had collected, and we actually provide trackers for our families to kind of keep track of all the things, how they help expectant moms and what their rate of cases that actually finalized were. It was a really helpful thing for us. So, you know, everybody looks for different things, and I'm not going to go through all the answers. It was a really great post. But you do want to look at their statistics. You know, how much are the average cases? How many placements have they done? How many fall throughs? And maybe not just this year, but in the past 3 years, you want to get a historical view to know if it's a good fit for you. Also, what can you expect as far as communication? That's a big one. And somebody mentioned communication. You know, somebody said in one of these answers, we went with the people who responded to us and really, you know, felt like they cared about who we were instead of people that we had to chase over and over again, which, by the way, there are some wonderful agencies that just are overwhelmed, and communication is never a very big strong point with a lot of these agencies. So I wouldn't write that off automatically. I would chase a couple times, and at the same time, it could be a really big turnoff, and that's okay. So you want to kind of know, what are your criteria, and what can you expect as far as support from them as well. Many agencies love working with families who are working with a consultant because they know they are going to be supported with or without them. And their focus is mostly on the birth moms, which is what you want. So a consultant in that manner can be really helpful for you to be able to, you know, give you that hug when you need it, really support you, tell you what questions to ask when an agency doesn't have time to do that. But going back to the birth dad thing really quickly, it is very rare that they come out of the woodwork. You know, when we were talking about this as a family, that was the words that we use. Is it, how common is it for them to come out of the woodwork and contest? I think that's what the question asked. And it's, I want to bring it around to birth moms as well, because I get this question all the time around fears of open adoption. And the fear stems from this idea that a birth mom is going to show up at your doorstep and say, I changed my mind, I really want to parent this baby, or I want to co-parent with you, and this is how I believe you should be parenting. That is a myth. That does not happen. A birth mother, when she signs papers, from what I understand, I've never sat in the room with a birth mom when they do this, but from what I understand, they get a huge stack of paper And I don't know how many times it says, I understand that I am relinquishing parental rights to this child. And I agree with that. They know what they're doing. They are not looking to co-parent with you. And they also won't show up at your door. Oh my God, it was this beautiful sunny morning and suddenly it just started downpouring. But it feels great to sit in an office with open windows. Another thing that came up was the transitional period when adopting older children or through an intervention case, which is becoming more and more common. That is when a child may have been in foster care and the mom has decided to make a private adoption plan so that the child doesn't continue in foster care if she doesn't think that she'll be able to parent the child again. So we have one of those happening right now. I am not an expert in this by any means, but a lot of times the courts are involved. They have to petition for a family. They usually need a family in place before they can go and ask the judge to be able to make a private placement plan. They will not allow it typically unless a family has already been identified. And then it takes time. Until then, you cannot really obtain medical records and talk to the foster family until it has been deemed okay that they are cleared for adoption. Then you can start gathering the information. And depending on the age of the child, it may take time to transition them into this new home. So that might look like visiting for an hour, and then the next time taking the child to the park. Maybe they have an overnight visit with you once, and then they go back to the family. So that transition period can be within a week. It could be within a couple weeks. It could be within a couple months. Again, it depends on the age of the child. It depends on the trauma that the child is coming to you with. So they want to make sure that, they're not just pulling a child out of one home and sticking them into another home when they are aware of what's going on. So we have been seeing more and more of those cases, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more as states are allowing these intervention cases to happen more and more, which I think is a beautiful, wonderful thing to put these children into permanent families. And finally, meeting with the mom pre-birth, which is either ahead of the birth, like months before or weeks before, depending on when she's due, and or maybe the day before delivery if she's scheduled for a C-section or if you make it down there before she delivers. So typically, if you are going ahead of the birth, first of all, if it's not a scheduled C-section, I never recommend trying to time it and going ahead of time to be there for the birth. I would rather you wait until you get that call that she has been admitted and is in labor. So much can happen. You could be sitting out of state for weeks waiting for her to deliver. So I wouldn't recommend that. If it's a scheduled C, totally different story. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to go out the night before, take her to dinner, pamper her a little bit. Either way, you want to come with some sort of gift for her. If she has other children, also bring gifts for the children if she's parenting. Those are the things that came up this week. So if you have a question about the adoption process, the adoption roadmap, please submit them to either support@rgadoptionconsulting.com. Again, support@rgadoptionconsulting.com. We would love to answer your questions live, and or you can find us on social media anywhere. Thank you for tuning in to This Week in Adoption, and we will see you next week. Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.